on the AFSO21 program specifically, but it's kind of looking at the little bit bigger picture and how process improvement fits into the overall business process that's pretty typical for most major commands in the Air Force. The business process is also the same one that's being used at the air staff level. But let's go ahead and roll through this, and then you'll see what I'm talking about here in a few minutes. So the big picture here is about 7-8 years ago now, 2006, the then Secretary Wynn rolled out this program called AFSO21, Air Force Smart Operations for the 21st Century. And what that was about was I'll show you a little bit more. There's a lot of things happening all at the same time that's required a new way of doing business. So we'll talk a little more about that. The next thing, as a part of that, then I'll talk about process alignment and getting results in general. What basically goes from the strategic planning function in any given organization all the way down to the tactical level of people. Is as low in the tactical level as people turning wrenches on a flight line. We'll talk a little bit about lean and lean process improvement, because that's the major approach that we're taking in the Air Force on how we look at a lot of these, how we look at processes and how we make them better. And then I'll just kind of wrap up with some ideas about what you can do as you go through and try to see if you can make this work for you and your organizations. So the big picture and why we needed some of this smarter operations, as it were, is we have this environment that we're getting more and more fiscal constraints, and I know you guys know all well about that. Our energy costs are increasing. In fact, the Air Force is the largest energy user of the federal government, and it's mainly because of our flying mission. So that's where we use a lot of the energy, but we're by far the largest user of energy. We still have combat operations going on all around, and then we have this changing strategic directions. You never know what's going to come around the next curve. So the reality of the whole thing is as we pursue these different opportunities in this, we have different opportunities that we have to pursue, but it's also an increasingly constrained environment. So we have to do something different to get there. And what we suggest and what we're working with in this particular aspect of process improvement is, how do we do the things that we do not only keeping them effective, because the Air Force is always effective. We're always going to get our job done. But we have to think more and more about the resources it takes to do that. So one of the things that you might want to consider is that a lot of the business processes that we've been doing over the last, are the same way we've been doing business over the last 30 years, and we have far less people involved in doing the same thing. So we need to look at the things that we do on a daily basis and figure out, okay, how can I continue to be effective with what I'm doing, but how do I make it a little more efficient, make it cost less, make less people involved, and that sort of thing. And so, because what we want to be able to do is keep delivering the right support to that, the pointy end of the spear out there. So for process improvement, in general, I'll call it CPI, continuous process improvement. That's kind of synonymous with AFSO21. While that might be the name of the program, what we do is continuous process improvement. So the goals are to continuously improve all the process in the Air Force. And any of this stuff that I'll talk about here, any of the approaches and information and tools that you might see in your study guides, any of that applies to a process. So what you need to be able to do is start thinking of, what is the process I'm working on? Every one of you have some sort of a process that you work day to day, and you have to be able to visualize that process. And I'll give you some hints on how to look for that here as we go along in this briefing. And so once you understand the process, the next step is get rid of the waste. And I'll talk to you about, there's 8 specific kinds of waste that we look for, and we'll talk about that as we go along as well. And then finally, try to understand that every airman, civilian, military, guard, reserve, anybody out there in the Air Force, contractor, the role that they have is to look at what you do and affect some sort of change, improve it, keep it effective, make it more efficient. So what we try to do, there's 5 specific areas that we target with our CPI and AFSO21 program. One is to increase the productivity of our asset, of our people. We want them to be more productive. So that's both efficiency and effectiveness. We also want to make sure that our critical assets remain available. We have to have all sorts of support equipment. There's all sorts of equipment out there that we want to make sure stays ready for us to use. We want to do things faster and be more agile, which means it may take individuals may have to have a lot of different experiences and training to do a lot of different things. And of course, it's always a mantra that we want to be safe and reliable in our operations, and then finally look for ways to reduce our dependence on energy. The bottom line is we just want to strengthen the Air Force, and there's a lot of things that we can do to make that happen. This CPI journey, is a massive undertaking. If you just kind of think about how the Air Force is structured, there's a lot of moving parts to this, and it's taking longer than I think most people would have thought. But I think with a couple of things I'll show you here in a minute, we're going to get some more help with making this focus on continuous process improvement a bigger deal for the Air Force. Just to let you know, we're part of this broader community, if you will. All these particular organizations, and there's a couple of military organizations, the Royal Air Force and the Australian Air Force, they're involved in continuous process improvement, Lean Six Sigma sorts of ways of improving the way they do business. Every one of these organizations are involved in that. And we have used many of them in various capacities as consulting with the Air Force. One of the things that we do, if you go through some more of this training, the black belt level, it's kind of the more advanced practitioner level, will go for a 2-week tour to one of these companies and be part of their process improvement organization, and they'll work on real live day-to-day problem solving. Toyota Company, as a matter of fact, we've worked with them quite a bit, and you'll see some of the products that we actually use that we basically lifted from Toyota with their approval, of course, and it's some of the things that we actually use on a daily basis. So we've worked with there's a lot of people out there that believe in this business because it works. Okay, AFSO21 in general, it's a model that's made up of a couple of different types of methodologies. Lean, which we'll discuss more here, has to do with removing waste from a process. Then there's Six Sigma, which is pretty heavy into statistics, and the main approach there is they remove variability from a process. Theory of constraints is another approach where we're looking for bottlenecks. Like every process has a bottleneck. And so there's a specific methodology in the theory of constraints that you look for attacking those bottlenecks. And then there's business process reengineering, which is basically a kind of a clean slate look, if you will, at a process where you throw the old process out the window and start over. So in general terms, we use all of these approaches, or bits and pieces from any one of them on any given problem solving, but we rely primarily on Lean because there's a lot of opportunity, and Lean is a fairly straightforward, actually none of this is real rocket science, but it's all pretty straightforward approaches to problem solving. And again, what we're trying to do is basically make our core mission in the Air Force, continue to be effective, but also we want to make it more efficient as well. And the bottom line is this last line is it's about results. If if you're just trying to go through events and not getting results, you know, a lot of it, not follow through to the end, that's just activity, and it's not going to get you anywhere. We want to have results, and if you follow through the results, you will find, as just by design, that process improvement, especially using the lean approach, gets rid of work, more work than it brings on. So it's something it takes a while to get real smart at this, but if you have the basic ideas that I'll go over here, it's a good starting point. Now here's what's going to be the big driver, I think, for process improvement here in the next, you know, for the foreseeable future. There's two AFIs that have come out. The brand new update to AFI 90-201 came out in August, where it has introduced a new Air Force inspection system. And you are probably familiar by now with these 4 major graded areas. I also note up there the new AFI 1-2 that just came out last month in May. And the name of that AFI is called Air Force Culture, Commander's Responsibilities. And if you set AFI 1-2 next to 90-201, you will see that the new 1-2 tells commanders that they have to do the stuff that's basically laid out in 90-201. So each commander is going to be responsible for executing the mission, managing resources, leading people, and improving the unit. It's called out specifically, so he's going to get graded on those 4 major areas. So as things are coming out, as the units and different wings around the Air Force are trying to get a grasp on what this means to them, you'll see something that, like for instance, the Reserve Command. I spent 2 weeks ago. I spent a week with the 315th Airlift Wing out there at Charleston, and I was helping them work on building a new strategic plan. And the way they wanted to structure their strategic plan and how they were going to do business from now on was around these 4 major graded areas. And so we came up with objectives and measures. You know, for instance, we wanted to find, you know, we'd say executing the mission, the primary mission. How do we know we are meeting our primary mission? What kind of measures are involved in that? So that's kind of the way, and USAFE is taking the same sort of approach, and I got a feeling that most of the other MAJCOMs are going to start looking at this, because these 4 major graded areas are going to be looked at. I'm sure you all have heard of MCT. You know, it's kind of the current, it's a web-based thing for the Inspector General to kind of keep an eye on what's going on out in the field. Well, as time goes on, it's going to start looking more and more like these 4 major graded areas with the objectives and measures behind it. So look for that in a future, in the future here before too long. Okay, so let's start from the kind of the big picture and then get down to the small picture. It all starts, all this process improvement starts with SA&D. Strategic alignment and deployment. And what that boils down to is it takes the strategic vision from the leadership of an organization, let's just call it a wing, and it plans and makes sure that the people all the way down to the tactical levels of that wing understand what the vision is, what the mission is, what the gap is between the mission, the current mission, and where we want to be in the future that's identified by that vision. And so to close that gap, to get to that future, there are going to be a whole series of strategic objectives plus measurements that go along with it to make that happen. So one of the things that's really important about strategy and strategy execution in particular is that strategy has to be cascaded and aligned throughout the organization. You'll have an organization and a wing commander that has a certain, there's a mission, there's objectives, measures to see, make sure they understand how things are being executed and making sure that they're closing the proper gaps so they can get to the vision. Well, all the lower level organizations have to fit into that as well. The wing goes down to the group, goes down to the squadrons, goes down to the working levels, you know, however they're broken out. And so you have to understand the strategy from the top and how you're going to execute that all the way down at the bottom. Somebody that's working in the travel pay area needs to understand what their connection is to the overall strategy of the wing. And that's what's key about this cascading and alignment. It takes a lot of communication up and down the chain. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about a business process. Now, this is fairly generic, but I think you'll recognize it, especially at the wing level, the MAGCOM level, and the air staff level. They follow along this business process pretty closely. Once you get down in the group and in the squadron level, there may be pieces of this that may or may not apply, but I think you'll understand as we go along. So the first thing is strategy. There's a strategy organization. Usually it's a 5/8 organization, or you know, it depends on how your wing or your MAGCOM is organized. But there is a function there that develops the strategic plan, and they manage a strategy execution process. So you have a plan. You have certain things that you watch on an annual basis. Usually they're reviewing this on a quarterly basis, and so they go through this. They go through this this strategy execution process once they develop the plan. The strategic plan usually has the vision, the mission, priorities, and goals. The strategy execution process usually has all the strategic objectives and measures so that you can figure out if you're making it. Then there's this strategy, this process management function. Some organizations have this more formalized than others, but what it boils down to is it's the group, it's somebody that's looking at that strategy execution process and saying, okay, so where are the problems? Usually when you're going through a strategy execution process review, there's some sort of a variation on a stoplight chart. So you can kind of tell by just looking at it, that would say, you know, if it's red, you've got a problem there, so where are the problems? Well, that's when people from that have some AFSO training or some problem solvers will go look at the red and say, what is it going to take? What kind of initiatives do I need to put together so that I can close that gap? And when they've discovered that, they'll develop some sort of action plans that will be specific things that need to be done to close the gap. Okay, so then the next piece is where you all are primarily involved, and it's the resource management piece. There's the manpower, how, manage the manpower piece. Do we have it? Are we structured so that we can take care of some of these initiatives? What does it look like out there in those out years? The PALM sort of planning. And then, of course, there's the current budget execution part of the business. So you have to be able to tie the resources over the course of the horizon, the planning horizon, to whatever it is you need to do to close the gaps in the strategy process. Now, that all gets put together in some sort of a corporate board structure. Again, the panels and committees are usually, that's something that's going on usually at the air staff level. I know at the MAGCOM level, they'll have the council board group. At Air University, we're kind of a NAF equivalent. We have a council board group. But it's essentially, you have the commanders at the council level, you have the vice commanders and the directors at the board level, and this is usually working groups that are kind of coming up with the ideas to begin with. So they make decisions at these through a corporate process of some sort to tie this money that's, say it's current year, so they tie the budget money to the action plans and initiatives to close the gap up here to execute the strategy. So that's how all the different parts fit together, and how you guys in the financial world fit in. You got to make sure that the council, board, group understand there are enough or not enough, of course there's never enough, resources to work with these different initiatives. Now let me give you kind of a little more of an example of if you kind of have an understanding of what the process is, the basic business process, here's how it's been executed at AETC. Now, first I'll kind of caveat this by saying this is a balanced scorecard strategy map from probably a year, maybe two ago, and it's been in the upheaval since. And we're right in the middle with the new commander. General Rand has a new approach to strategy execution, and so that's getting ready to come out any time now. And if you recall my brief discussion about the 315th Air Wing, what they would do is they would have the 4 major graded areas somehow laid out in this particular some sort of a format, a balanced scorecard format, so they understand what it is they're trying to fix. So having said that, this is kind of, if you think about this in a generic sense, it'll still make sense no matter what kind of strategy execution process your organization has. So what this particular strategy map, which is what I think is the beauty of this is a one-page document that a commander can quite literally run his or her organization at a strategic level. And why I say that is you start off and you have the mission at the top. You have this is the vision at the time, and they've changed. I think both of these have changed since then. But then you have this mission impact. This particular objective that's at the top is basically the product of the organization. So this is what AETC exists for, to deliver highly qualified expeditionary force. And there's measures that go along behind that. And that's why this thing is green. They're saying, as it stands today, when I'm reviewing this, it's green, we're doing well according to the measures we have laid out. The next group, this whole middle area right here, these are the processes that the organization takes on to deliver this product. Okay? So it recruits the force, it trains the force, it educates the force, and in order to do those things, they select the right candidates, they attract a candidate mix, and all these are different objectives that are laid out here. And if you'll notice, some of these are yellow, which means there's some kind of an issue going on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here just in just a minute. Down at the bottom, these are called enablers. So not only do you have to do the process to create the product, but what enablers do is those are things that allow the organization to take care of itself and its people. I've got to develop people. I've got to have good I have to have good installations. I need good IT infrastructure, that sort of thing. So this is you have to also worry about that sort of thing, and that's what's at the bottom. Now, in order to make this work, think with in your background and think in your head about the process I just talked about, the business integration process. And then this represents the strategy piece of it. This is actually the strategy execution piece. And so what we've done, if you look back here under recruit the force, this particular one, you'd go through a quarterly review, and the commander would say, okay, so what's going on in this case with the attract the best candidate mix? Why is it yellow? What's the problem, and why isn't it green? So what you do is we'll drill into that a little bit to kind of show how you can tie strategy, the strategic plan, to execution and process improvement. So we're looking at this best. So you have what you end up doing is you have a quarterly review. You look at the objective that's tied to this, the track candidate mix, and understand what the measure is, and understand what the target's supposed to be, and that'll give you a gap. In this particular case, when they went under this, they looked at this review. This happened about 8 years ago, but it's very useful as an example. The recruiting service goes out and contacts people to become nurses in the Air Force. And so what they do is what they want to do is they want to be able to say, out of every contact I made, I want to make sure that the target is I want 25% of them to actually sign in the dotted line, raise their right hand, and become Air Force officers, as a nurse. Well, at that point in time, it was only 14.8. So that highlights a problem on the strategy map. And that's why it was yellow, because there was a gap. It wasn't meeting the target. So then they go, okay, so that's when you get involved with somebody. They say, okay, AFSO21 people or somebody that can look at the problem. You may have some training, you may not, but some of the stuff you can pick up, and you just basically go out and figure out how do you solve the problem. Well, when they went through this event, they actually had an AFSO21 event. They found out that the reason why people weren't signing on the dotted line and becoming nurses was because it took too long to hire them. That's what it boiled down to. The civilian, if you go to a civilian hospital, they could have got hired in 120 days. At the Air Force, they got hired in 150 days. So through the event, they said, okay, how are we going to fix this? And so they went through, did a root cause analysis, did a number of different things, and of all the things that they figured out they needed to do was delete this thing called a nurse corps selection board. That sounds kind of important to me, but I guess it wasn't that important at the time. They found that there was a lot of redundant information going on in these boards, and it was just taking time. So they got rid of the board, and they found that they could actually hire a nurse in 90 days instead of 150, and then compare that to the civilian hire, which is 120. Well, as you might guess, not only did they meet their target 1 year later, but shortly after that, they more than doubled it. They were getting almost 50% of those contacted would actually sign on to be nurses, because they figured out what was the root cause of people not signing on the dotted line. And so they made some great improvements, and then they decided, hey, we have troubles with medical professionals as well, doctors and dentists in particular. And so they started looking into that a little bit, but it turned out to be a bigger problem, because when it came to doctors and dentists, they didn't really care about how fast they got hired. What they cared about is how much money they were going to make. So how they actually solve that, I don't know that they've solved that to this date. But as you can see, some of these process improvement, the results they're getting can lead to other improvement projects. Okay, so now so that's how they tie it all the way from the strategy. That's what this piece represents right here. That's a strategic objective for AETC, and they went all the way down to the low levels, the lower level of the organization to get specific types of people in the Air Force. So they wanted to close that particular gap. Now, and they did that using an AFSO21 event. And that's when I want to kind of go briefly into what it takes to do one of those. A simple, the simple answer, this isn't rocket science answer, is that there's an 8-step problem-solving process out there. Each one of these, and we lifted this particular process right from Toyota. They use exactly the same 8 steps, and they use this on a daily basis. And essentially, it boils down to what's the problem, not what's the symptom, what's the problem, and that takes some doing. There's each one of these steps has a series of tools that you can go through and figure out what it is. Hang on a second, I'm going to have to stand up, my light just went out. It's on some kind of a timer, sorry about that. And so if you look through your study guides, there's a lot of information on the tools that it takes to go through any one of these steps. But the short story is, here's the problem. You break down the problem. You look at data. one of the key things that you have to understand about this 8-step problem-solving process, it's not going to be that useful to you if you don't get good data related to the problem. If you don't have data, you got to go out and gather data. But it really is important to have data for a whole lot of reasons, not the least of which is data is unemotional. It is what it is, and then when you start talking about it to commanders and you can show data, hard data on it, then things you can make better decisions. Then you have a target, so the first 3 steps kind of go back and forth as you're trying to work through the problem, because sometimes whatever your target is and the data that you have, might affect what the real problem could be. And so this is kind of, the first 3 steps kind of take some iteration before you get there. So then once you find out what the gap is, that's the gap between, that's basically where you want to be and what the target is, then you try to figure out why do we have the gap. Remember back in the nurse thing, they went through a root cause analysis and they figured out it took too long to hire somebody. That was the root cause of that problem. So then you say, okay, now that I understand what the root cause is, I develop an approach to what it is. What am I going to do to fix it? I put the countermeasures into place, and then this is another, step 7 is really important, because if you have to make sure it's working for you. Did those countermeasures that I just put into place, are they working? I have to gather more data. I have to make sure I'm going in the right direction. If I find that the situation is getting worse, or it's just not satisfying your results that you want, you need to go back up here because you probably got the wrong root cause, and then kind of go through these steps again. If this does show that you're going in the right direction, and remember, you don't have to solve world hunger on the first pass. That's why we call it continuous process improvement. You can, if you're working in the right direction, then maybe you just need to refine it over time. Well, that's good. Declare success and look to improve it again. But as you improve things and you get the right results and you have a new process, this is 8th step is very important, because this standardizes the process. You don't want to go back to doing what you did before, because you're going to get the results you got before. So you standardize, and sometimes that's write a new AFI, that's a new checklist, that's any of those sorts of things. So there are some basic advantages of having this 8-step approach that we've been using, and among them are it's a systematic approach with a common language. So as you start getting people that get more and more exposed to this, we talk about this in there's a lecture and some seminars in SOS. So every Air Force captain that's going through there, which is now going to be 100%, they're going to see some of this. We talk about this in various levels of PME here at Maxwell. So as people start getting more and more exposed to this common structure and systematic approach is going to be easier to use over time. There's a format for working through this and recording your results, and we'll talk about that. It's called an A3, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. The A3 plus these, the basic 8-step process is a real easy way of sharing information. So it's and you can do things like benchmarking, where somebody did a process improvement, got some great results, pass that on to another organization, see if they can use it. So it's really a good way of doing that. Here's this is an kind of a simple version of an A3. This particular version, what's in there is it has questions that you might ask yourself when you're going through this, and it talks about the tools you might use. As an example, clarify and validate the problem. It talks about the tools, the main one being the S&D. What's your strategic plan? What does the strategy look like? What are the objectives and the measures? You need to go look at that, because you don't want to improve something that's not going to close the gap in an organizational strategy. Otherwise, you're just basically, doing the process improvement for no apparent reason. So try and tie it to your strategy. Voice of the customer is another tool. Go talk to your customer. You need to know who that is. So, and it goes on through all 8 steps. As we go through these things, and this is where, you know, especially the financial managers would be involved in some sort of a process improvement event, is the first 3 steps: clarify the problem, break down the problem, and set the target. That's and then at the bottom, once they get these 3 steps done, that's when you go back to the commander and say, okay, boss, we went out and we investigated the problem that you want us to look at. Do we have it right? And so typically what happens is, you know, your commander's going to say, go fix something, right? And the commander's going to, he knows that it's a pain for him or her at the time, but it may just be a symptom of a bigger problem. That's what this discussion through the first 3 steps, why it's important, because what it's going to do is it's going to focus you in on the real problem and not just symptoms. And so then you brief that out. It's called a it's escaping right now. I'll come to it in a minute. But it's a vector check. Sorry about that. And so they have another vector check. Once they have this vector check, that lets them go and figure out, okay, so if that's the problem, that's the gap we want to close, let's go up here and look at the root cause. So you go determine the root cause, all sorts of tools to do that, and figure out what you're going to do about it. And then at the end of planning for developing countermeasures, you have another vector check. Now this is where it's important for especially financial managers to understand what's going on with these things, because this is where you're going to commit resources. Once they understand what the root cause is and they develop the countermeasures, that's when they should brief the commander and whoever needs to know all these things, including the people with the money. What's it going to cost? Because it's going to cost equipment, it's going to cost people, it's going to cost time. So there's all sorts of things going on at this develop countermeasures piece. So if there's a thumbs up there, then we move on and start executing the plan. Let's put countermeasures into place. Let's see if it worked. Gather more data. If it did, standardize the process, brief out the commander, thumbs up, everything was good. This is just kind of a notional A3 that's completed. It's usually a piece of paper. It can be 8.5 by 10 or legal size, but it has basic information of each step. We try to get people that are doing these things to be parsimonious. Parsimonious means as much information as possible using the least amount of basically writing. You know, so you want to try to make sure that you know, if you have pictures and you can show data and graphs and that sort of thing, use it. You know, this isn't, you know, you don't write long paragraphs in each of these areas. You know, you basically put in the information that decision makers can make decisions with. Okay, so let's just shift real quick here and talk a little bit about lean. So we went from a strategic plan to do a process improvement that ends up closing a gap in one of the objectives in the strategy map. It was resourced properly. If it was resourced properly and executed properly, you've closed the gap, okay? And then you go attack another gap on the strategic plan. Now, how we actually do that, how the process improvement people actually do that, is we use this methodology called lean. And what lean is, it's this idea of reducing waste in a process. So again, as I said early on, this applies to anything. Administrative manufacturing it was developed in the manufacturing world, you might know, but it applies to any kind of process that you can visualize. And we'll talk a little bit about how you might be able to visualize the process. But the idea is that you want to get down to this point that you want to remove whatever's non-value. And so that's the key to success, is understanding what is non-value added. Let's kind of talk a little bit in broad terms about lean process improvement. Right here we've got a notional example of a process. This happens to be a a routine go see your doctor at the local base clinic, or maybe the Prime Care downtown or something like that. So what you'll do is you'll go in there, you'll wait in line because there's a long line of people trying to sign in. You'll sign in, you'll wait, you'll go to the lab, then you'll wait, they'll run tests on your blood, you'll wait, you'll go see the doctor who's going to talk about it, you'll wait, you get some kind of treatment, then you'll wait again, and then they'll kick you out, and then you'll go home. So if you look at this, the green represents value added. The key to success is, who is it value added to? It's value added to the customer. And in this case, the patient is the customer. So anything that you see that's green there, the patient will recognize as being value added. And then anything that's not green, it's not value added. Waiting is a big waste, one of the key 8 wastes. So if you also notice that value added is usually a small percentage of the total lead time. Total lead time is from when you walk in the door to when you walk out of the door. It's how long the whole process takes. And what we've done in traditional cost-saving measures, and traditionally what we do is we look at how do we make the value-added stuff better. But we don't want to do that. We should be focusing on the non-value-added items. So here's kind of the way that traditionally we looked at it. We looked at each one of the value-added things and figured out, well, how can I do my value-added steps better? You got to believe that the people that are doing the process are doing it very well. You can look at anybody doing any task that they're charged to do, and they're probably doing it about as efficient and effectively as they can do it. Everybody in the Air Force, for the most part, are smart. They understand how to do that. So why attack the value-added stuff? Let's attack the non-value added, and that's what lean thinking is all about. Leave that value-added stuff alone. You need to identify it, put it aside, then figure out what's not value-added, get rid of it. Here's kind of a little example that that's real-life example. This is this was a maintenance group commander, and I'm not sure who else he was talking to, but this was out in Iraq a couple years back, and this is quite literally a back of a napkin kind of look. And he looked at his little, the problem that he had was that he couldn't get tires for C-17s into Balad to be used fast enough. They were burning through tires, and they just couldn't understand why they couldn't get them out there, and wanted to figure out how do I get them faster. So he kind of drew out the value stream, which is something we'll talk a little more about, and he basically found that you start at Charleston, there's some ground time until you can fly over to probably Qatar, where the big supply base is there. Then it sat around longer, and then you flew it into to Balad, and it sat until it got on the airplane, until the wheels got put on the airplane. And it took 10 days to go from Charleston to Balad, and they kind of broke it up and found out that 94% of the time it sat on the ground and waited. And so then they're starting to think about, and 6% in the air, and says, well, how can you can't really fly a C-17 or a C-5 a whole lot faster. It's going as fast as it's going to do. And so why attack the 6%? Let's look at the 94%. And that's what they in fact did. Okay, so this is how you think about lean. There's 5 different principles: specify, value, value stream, flow, pull, perfection. The first one is specifying value. Like I said earlier, value is determined by your customer. You need to know who the customer is. It's not determined by you trying to do a process and, say something like the customer doesn't understand, we've got regs and rules and all that. Okay, that may be true, but in the end, if you want to improve the process, you need to figure out what the customer wants, because that is how you make determination on what's value, what's not value added, and what you can target for removal. The next thing that you have to do is you have to be able to figure out, okay, so what's the process? I need to understand how the process is laid out so that I can figure out what it is that I want to try and get rid of. This, and this is the, death by stickies kind of approach. But what this is, I'm not quite sure what the process is, but there's a couple of things I want to point out. One thing is, basically use a sticky on each step of the way. So that's what you're looking at. The yellow stickies represent all the different tasks that go on in this process. The purple stickies and some of these other things are data, that are associated with it. How many people, how long, all that kind of thing. All important information. But if you'll notice across the bottom, and it's a result, once you lay the stickies out there, you do what they call a value analysis. And if you look carefully there, you'll see red dots, and I don't know if you can tell if it's green, but there's some green dots. And the green dots, which are, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 green dots. Those are the 5 steps that, according to the analysis by the SMEs that are sitting in the room looking at this, those will be the value-added steps. The rest of them are not value-added. This is pretty typical. If you have a process that has not been improved before, you're going to find that you're only going to have 10, maybe 20% of the whole process is value-added, and the rest is not value-added, which gives you a lot of targets for removal to improve the process. A couple of these, like there's one there, there's a couple of them along here that have a R on the red dot, and that's simply to identify the fact that while it's not value added to the customer, it may be required, and that's in such a way that's beyond your control. For instance, the contracting world, the contracting squadrons have all sorts of FAR regulations that preclude, they have to do certain things according to the FAR. So the only way that you can get rid of that, while it's not valued to the customer, is you'd have to go try to figure out how to change the FAR, which is usually not that easy to do, if not impossible. So you got to identify those two, and all that's going to do is that's going to say, okay, I've got a lot of things that are not value added, and I have a bunch of things that are not value added but required. I'm going to still go after the not value added, and we'll figure out what to do about the other ones later. You're not solving world hunger. You're trying to improve the process the best you can with the resources you have in a fairly compact, like 1 to 6 months kind of time frame. But you can't do it unless you see it. This is the value stream. That's how you see it. The next thing you want to do with the process is make sure it's moving. A lot of times you might have heard of a thing called batch and queue. I'm not sure what kind of processes are out there, but nowadays in the financial field. But I always harken back to the old-fashioned way before DTS, and you had TY vouchers. Chancellor would get up there and he'd fill out his voucher, and he'd go over to the travel pay area and he'd stick it in a box. Well, the box would get 10 deep before one clerk came up and grabbed all 10 at one time, sat down, did their checks on it, took the whole stack of 10 to the next person. That's a batch and queue. You're moving one batch through the process. So you have somebody that's working on it at the time, working real hard, but you got the other 4 people either doing nothing or doing something else, but it's not flowing. What you want to do is get to a point where you have single piece flow is the most efficient way. You work on one, move it. Work on another one, move it. You know, keep it moving. Once you get truly efficient and you get a truly flow system, you want to try and get to a point where it's a pull system. You only want, again, this all becomes, this is the customer focused idea. Instead of pushing a whole bunch of stuff through the system, you want to react to the customer. When the customer wants it, that's when the system works. So the customer is pulling off of the system. So, you know, instead of you know, so there's you'll see this in a lot of systems are hybrids of push and pull, but if you kind of think about a automobile manufacturing assembly plant, we have one here that we take people to all the time, the Hyundai plant. It's outside of Montgomery. It's a pull from the sense that they don't make the car until the customer orders it. So when they get an order from a customer, then they put it in the queue and it starts moving down the assembly line. So that's kind of a pull system. That way they can become, you know, the process is much more efficient. Finally, the fifth of the principles is this thing called perfection. You probably won't get there. Perfection, though, is something you need to keep in mind. So as you think about how am I going to improve my process, or what do I want you ask the question, what do I want my process to look like in the future? You have to have this idea of where do I want to be with this. Now, you might not get there. You might get, you know, sometimes we do a lot of the administrative sort of events we do, you know, become a, what do we want the process to look like? Well, I want to push a single button and it all comes out the other end. You know, it's all electronic, for instance. Well, you know as well as I do, there aren't, you know, in certain processes, they just, the systems aren't developed far enough yet. But you make steps towards it. That's the whole idea. But you got to have this perfection idea in your mind if you want to get there, so you know kind of where you're heading. Okay, so the bottom line of all this is waste. Now that you understand the 5 principles of lean and kind of the mindset that you have, what you want to do is you want to understand the customer, know what they view as value, determine what the value stream is so that you can figure out what's value, what's not value, try to get it to flow and become a pull system if possible. In order to get there, you start figuring out, okay, now I know what value is, so how do I get rid of the non-value? And that's what you kind of look at this waste piece of it. The kind of the big question is right here, this second bullet that says, you know, at least in general terms, is if this step went away, does the customer care, or do they even know it went away? So if you think about all your processes, you know, can you still get it done but remove a step? I don't know. That's part of the drill that you're going to go through. Okay, there's 8 specific types of waste that we're trying to hunt down and eradicate. These are those. And here's some examples. Let's just kind of walk quickly through some examples of each. The first one is a defect. You guys do forms. Any form that's not filled out correctly has to be done again. That's a defect. That's waste. So what you do is you try to error-proof things. There's all sorts of tools that go along with each one of these, but that in particular is an example. Make sure the form can only be filled out one way. If it's on a computer, maybe there's a drop-down menu that gives you options, you know, so they can only do it the right way. They can only give you the right answer. They can only manufacture the right part, you know, that sort of thing. But defects is the first one. The next one is overproduction. And if you go ask anybody in an assembly environment like Toyota, they'll say this is the worst waste of all, overproduction. You're making more than what the customer really wants, because when you do that, it generates a whole host of these other wastes. But an example in the administrative world is, you know, you're making the handouts and you're making more than you really need. If you need 12, because 12 people is going to show up, make 12 copies. Don't make 25 just in case others are going to show up. because then you'll throw it away, or you'll have to store it, or and when you store things, if you start thinking real big, then you have to have facilities to store it in, and you have to have inventory managers, and it goes on and on. The next one we talked a little bit about earlier, waiting. Any kind of waiting is waste. You don't want your customer waiting for anything. Now, the one exception to the rule is if waiting is part of the process, which is not very often, but as an example, if any of you are familiar with composite parts on aircraft, a lot of aircraft nowadays are made with composite parts. And what a composite material boils down to in a lot of cases is it's some kind of could be like a cloth material, but it's pressed together with resins under high pressure, and then it's allowed to cure. The curing process is waiting. Okay, so that is a part of the process. Now, if the guy that's laid up the material is sitting there staring at it while it's curing, that is waiting waste. Get that person to go off and do something else while this thing's curing. You see the difference there? So waiting is no good. Non-standard or over-processing. Getting to a standard process is real key to any kind of process, because that will allow you to make improvements. If you do it differently every single time, how do you know what the problem is with the process? So the key to success in process improvement is get a standard and improve from that standard. So if you don't have a standard, it could lead to this over-processing. Think of gold plating. I mean, you've heard of gold plating before. We don't do that as much as we used to do in the old days, it seems like. But you're getting more than what the customer really wanted. So over-processing, non-standard processing is no good. Transportation. Transportation and this one down here, down below, motion, are somewhat related, so I'll talk about them together. Transportation is moving stuff. Motion is moving you. Motion is more like human factors sort of thing. So either one of those are waste, so you want to minimize them. Now, granted, because of the way your facilities are laid out, as an example, you may have to transport. Okay, great. Well, there's other waste you can look at. But you want to try and minimize any of these wastes. So attack what the biggest targets are is what we get down to. But this is moving equipment and just moving stuff, moving papers, moving, whatever. And this is moving you. Either stretching across your desk or walking down the hall because you only have a LAN printer for 5 offices instead of a printer connected to your office, to your particular computer, whatever. Intellect is basically failure to use your subject matter expert. The people that are doing the work know how to do the job way better than you, for the most part. Ask them about it. How do they feel about it? How can they improve things? What makes sense to them? It is waste if you don't use that resource. Finally, down at the bottom here is excess inventory. To have a true pull system, you have to have some inventory in process. Okay? What this says is excess inventory. Once you understand your process and it flows properly, you will know what kind of inventory you need in the process to make it move like it should. Too much is waste, because then you have to store it, you have to move it, all that sort of thing. So those are the wastes. If you can get rid of any of those wastes at any time, you're doing the right thing. The couple of tools that are real important for process improvement in general is this idea of standard work, which we talked a little bit about, and another thing called 6S, to be distinguished from 6 Sigma. This is 6S, and I'll show you the difference. First of all, standard work is, you got to get there. You have to get to a point where your process has a standard so that you do it the same way every time. Granted, there may be some things that, especially I think about going into hospital clinic, and there's a different diagnosis, so there's a different process, so there's some variation in the standard, but this is the ideal. You want to try and have a good standard. It has a certain sequence, the tasks that are assigned to a single person, they know what they're supposed to do, and what it does is once you have this standard process, it represents the current best practice. That means you have a baseline from which to improve from, so you improve from there. So that's the idea. Here's kind of just what standard work is. It's something that there's a lot of visual control, so you can identify waste. If I have a good standard, I know when things are out of whack, and because I can see it going wrong. So there's different ways of doing that. It's the best practice. It's owned by the work group. The people that do the work own the standard. Let them figure out what works best for them. And then as you get a standard put into place, then you can train others on how to do that. So it really makes good sense to have a standard, because anybody can, once you train them up, anybody can walk in and do the same standard work every time. And again, it's this bottom line basis for continuous process improvement. You have to have a standard so you have a place to improve from, so you know where the problems lie. Okay, this is the 6S piece. As you fight to have a standard work, but in order to kind of before you even get started, it's good to have this 6S process in place. And what 6S simply is kind of a housekeeping sort of approach. One of these things, you look at this girl at a desk and there's all sorts of stuff all over the place. Where am I going to find that briefing? Somebody just asked me for a briefing. I got to go into my file manager. My file manager is a mess. You got to kind of organize so that you can be more efficient. And this 6S talks about these 6 different steps: sort, straighten, shine, safety, standardize, and sustain. And what sort is, you go in there, think about you can do this at your desk. You can do this at your garage at home, your kitchen, somewhere in your office. I mean, one of the things we did is we had a storage room in the basement of the headquarters at Air University. You would not believe how much junk was in there. It was unbelievable. But the idea is, get in there, pull it all out, send the stuff away that you don't need or throw it away. And then what you do need, you straighten it. You arrange it so you know where it's at and you can access it again very easily. Keep everything clean. That's an easier way. It helps you see. This 6S helps you see where waste may lie. Then you also need to be able to standardize the process. Think about the garage example again. Usually, if you're like me, you go clean out your garage in the springtime. It needs spring cleaning. Well, that's because I didn't set some sort of a standard or sustain piece to it, where I go back in there and I make sure everything keeps going back in the same place all the time. I'll keep putting more and more junk in there, and then spring cleaning comes around and I have to redo it again. But if you sustain the process and you keep putting things back and you keep getting rid of stuff that you don't need, that's how you sustain it, and it stays in good order. And then finally, make sure it's a safe environment. So here's the kind of a recap slide. There's 5 principles, and this all lean has to do with what am I going to do to fix a problem. I have a root cause. I need to have a countermeasure in place to remove the root cause. The root cause is something that if I take it away, the problem will never happen again. And so if you're thinking continuous process improvement, that's what this is all about. You think about it in how am I going to have, I start by how am I going to have how do I look for what to remove? I need to understand what value is. And so that's what the principles are about. Once I understand what's not value, I look for the waste and get rid of the waste. And then I want to be able to get to a point where I have standard work and I have a good, clean, orderly environment using the 6S process. So what you can do, is try to get some training. You have some study guides that were handed out for this class. There's SAF USM AFSO21 SharePoint that you can access through the Air Force portal. It has all sorts of information on it. If you want to go get a little more information on how to get trained, like maybe go get a green belt or the black belt or whatever, pursue it. Make sure that whatever you do, it's aligned with your organization's strategy. Figure out everybody's got a strategy out there. A lot of times it's dusty on top of that shelf, but re-engage with the leadership if you need to see if you can get that dusted off and more current. Get involved in some value stream mapping. When you're trying to go approach a problem, map it out. Make sure you understand the process, and then communicate with people that need to be involved in how they go about doing this. What's the vision for improvement? Where are we going to go with it? And then finally, all the way down at the bottom here, you don't know you've improved anything unless you're monitoring and measuring it. Make sure you understand which direction you're headed. Again, the last couple of things, to wrap up again is we're looking to increase productivity, get your curriculum equipment always available, do it faster and more agile. It has to be safe. And then how do I make things more energy efficient? And for gosh sakes, this down here at the bottom, get results. Don't just spin your wheels on this. Follow through with these things and make changes that have good results. Okay, that's it, but let me show you one thing real quick. There's an app for that. If you haven't already found it, if you can go to the App Store for both Android and iPhones, you can get this little app out there. So I'm not sure where it was. It was developed by somebody out at PACAF, is what I understand. But this is a really good one place to go where you get a lot of the tools and some understanding about how to use them. It has that eight-step problem-solving process. It breaks it out into different steps. It shows you all the tools that go along with those steps, and it has a whole host of other good things. So this is a really good little tool that you can go find, and I real highly recommend it. And that is that. So if I don't know, Captain Wright, if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer, or you can shoot me emails, or I'm on the global at Maxwell Air Force Base. Glad to help any way I can.
Questions from the class? One question, sir. Can you talk about the challenges of claiming victory too soon in a continuous process improvement?
Yeah, well, I think I've seen that be a problem, but it always comes down to one thing, I think, that usually causes the trouble, and that's the fact that you didn't go follow up with new data to show that the process that and the fix that you proposed and the fix that your boss paid for actually made a difference. And so I think that it goes back to gathering good data. You financial management types, you know how to do data. Get out there and gather the data. I think that's going to be the way to preclude any other problem of, in that sort of light.
Great. Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Have any parting comments, sir, before we sign you off?
No, you're in an important. Well, I'll just say that you guys are in an important position. It's good to make sure that the people that you're dealing with understand the fiscal realities of where they're going, and as they go through process improvements, they need to understand that as part of the countermeasures and the part of the follow-up is the resources that are going to be able to commit to it. So you might not be able to, solve world hunger because you don't have enough money now, but maybe you can do, 80% of it. So that's the kind of communication I highly recommend you guys bring forth to the people that are working process improvement. But go do good things.
Do, Dr. Chancellor, we appreciate the time and effort that you put into the presentation. Thank you very much, sir.
Next time.